40,000 years ago, a wolf died in Siberia, and last decade, somebody picked up its head, with the fur still on it and the whiskers still attached. Not a fossil, not a cast, not a reconstruction, not an artist's impression. The animal. Its teeth, its brain, the tissue of its face, largely intact, held in 2 human hands. Read that list again, because one item on it does not belong. Teeth are hard. Teeth survive things. Fur is tough. But a brain is the softest tissue a body owns. It is the first thing to liquefy in almost every death that has ever happened. A brain that is still a brain after 40,000 years is not preservation, it is something closer to a suspension. It came out of the permafrost in Yakutia, in the Russian Arctic. And the reason it looks like that is the reason this whole story exists. So that is the what, here is the why, and it is not really about wolves. When something dies, it does not simply vanish. It gets taken apart by bacteria and fungi that need warmth to work. Everything you think of as decay is that, microscopic things eating, in temperatures they can tolerate. Drop the temperature far enough and they stop. Not slow down, stop. Which means the permafrost is not a graveyard. It is a pause. Sarah, what does that actually give us that bones don't?
The outside of the animal, which is the part we normally lose completely. From a skeleton, you can work out how something was built, how it moved, what it ate, how strong its jaw was. What you can never get is what it looked like. Fur length, fur color, the shape of an ear, whether the whiskers were long or short, what the inside of a nose was like. All of that is soft tissue, and it's the first thing to go. With a frozen animal, you're not reconstructing an appearance from clues, Tom. You're just looking at it.
And once you can look at it, you start noticing things nobody expected to be able to ask. Which brings us to the second animal and the argument it started. In the summer of 2018, near the Indigirka River in Saka, people found a lump of frozen ground with something in it. Inside was a puppy, 2 months old, a male. His head was there, his nose, his whiskers, his eyelashes, his mouth. And when they looked inside that mouth, he still had his milk teeth. He had died before losing a single one. He was around 18,000 years old. The find was reported through the Northeastern Federal University in Yakutsk, and it is worth noticing how it reached them. Not from a dig, not from a survey. Somebody who lives there came across a frozen lump of ground by a river and looked closer. That is how most of this works. There is no excavation season for permafrost. The ground decides when it gives something up, and somebody has to be standing there when it does. Peter, why did that particular find cause such a fuss?
Because of when he died, and what he might be. 18,000 years ago, sits right in the window where wolves were becoming dogs. Nobody agrees exactly when that happened, but that's the neighborhood. So the team ran his DNA, expecting a clean answer, and the sequencing couldn't tell them whether he was a dog or a wolf. Not a marginal call, it genuinely could not separate the two. They named him Dogor, which means friend in the local Yakut language, and which also happens to sound exactly like the question they were stuck on.
That is a remarkable place for a 2-month-old animal to end up, sitting on the line between the wild thing and the thing that sleeps by the fire. The answer took years. In 2022, work published in Nature by Anders Bergstrom at the Francis Crick Institute in London placed him an ancient wolf. Not the first dog, not the missing link. A wolf puppy who died in the cold and then stayed exactly as he was for 18,000 years, while everything above him changed completely. And I want to sit on that for a second, because it is easy to skate past. He had milk teeth. That is a detail that only exists because his mouth survived. It tells you he was a baby, and it tells you he never got the chance to stop being one. Every ordinary fact about him, the eyelashes, the nose, the shape of his face, is information that would simply not exist if he had died 300 kilometers to the south. Sarah, is there something uncomfortable about how well these things keep?
There is, and it's worth saying out loud. Everything you've just described has a wet nose and closed eyes, and it looks like something you could pick up and warm. That's not how we're used to meeting the deep past. A skeleton keeps you at a distance. It's clearly a thing, clearly finished. A frozen puppy doesn't do that. It short-circuits the part of your brain that files animals as either alive or gone. And people who work with these finds talk about how strange the first hour is.
So, the permafrost gives us the one thing bones cannot, an animal that still has a face. Though it is worth being clear about what it does not give us, because it is easy to oversell. Frozen is not the same as fresh. Cold slows chemistry down enormously, but it does not stop it entirely. Long molecules still break, slowly, over tens of thousands of years. That is exactly why Dogor's identity took years to settle instead of an afternoon. The material was there, but it was worn, and reading worn material takes better tools than reading clean material. And every one of these animals only tells you about the moment it died. A frozen puppy is a photograph, not a film. You get an extraordinary amount of detail about one instant and nothing at all about the day before it. Which leaves one thing left to explain, and it is the part that turns this from a nice story into an uneasy one. Why now? These finds are not turning up because we finally got good at looking. They are turning up because the ground is opening. Permafrost is frozen soil, and frozen soil that stops being frozen slumps, cracks, and washes out. And what has been paused inside it for tens of thousands of years comes to the surface. Most of these animals are not found by expeditions. They are found by people who live there and by ivory hunters working the eroding riverbanks, because that is where the ground is giving way fastest. Which produces a strange arrangement. The people most likely to find a scientifically priceless animal are people looking for something else entirely, working ground that is collapsing under them. Whether a find reaches a laboratory at all depends on who happens to be standing there and what they decide to do next. And the window is short. Something that has been stable at a constant temperature for 40,000 years does not stay intact for long once it is warm and in the open air. The clock that was stopped starts again immediately. Peter, so every one of these discoveries is also a symptom.
That's the shape of it, yes. The same process that hands you a 40,000-year-old wolf's face is the process nobody wants running. And it isn't a neat trade either. The ground doesn't hand things over politely. Most of what thaws simply rots, in the open, for the first time in tens of thousands of years. The specimens that reach a laboratory intact are the lucky remainder of something much larger going soft. We're not being given a museum. We're standing next to one that's melting, catching what we can.
And that is the honest ending, I think. Somewhere in Yakutia there is ground that has held its breath since before there were cities, before farming, before anyone had drawn anything on a cave wall. Inside it are animals in the position they died in, with their fur and their whiskers and their last mouthful still in them. They are coming out now, not because we went and got them, but because the lid is coming off, and the ones we get to see are the exception. For every animal that reaches a laboratory with its whiskers on, there are others surfacing on a riverbank nobody is walking along, softening in the sun over a summer, going the way everything else has always gone. We are meeting a handful of survivors from a collection we never knew we had, and mostly cannot keep. 40,000 years is a long time to keep a face. It turns out all it needed was for nothing to change.